Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I am happy to be here with you today as we are going to be hearing an announcement from the White House today with an answer to the question, how do we stop the violent crime that has surged across the United States? A problem that has affected not just major cities, but little towns throughout the United States with greater numbers of violent crime, murders, affecting all American citizens everywhere. The White House, Joe Biden, has finally come up with a solution, and he is about to announce that solution today, June 23rd, in just a few hours. What is that solution? What is that answer? Believe it or not, it can be summed up in one word. That's right. There is a one-word answer to the problem of violent crime in the United States in 2021. But before we get to that, we do want to take a moment and say, if this is the first time that you are seeing the program, we want to welcome you and we thank you for joining us. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary on this channel. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you, talking about the issues that matter, that affect everyone in the world. And we look forward to your comments on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, on DLive, and in fact, all social media that the internet overlords will allow to hear your comments and your phone calls from anywhere in the world expressing your First Amendment right to free speech. We look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to join us in this expression of free speech and discussing the issues that matter to us all. Now to the issue today on the White House and its answer to the problem of violent crime, to its answer to the question of homicides that have gone skyrocketing in many cities across the United States. Now, to truly understand this problem, we have to look back and understand what has been the cause. What started the problem? Well, it was a little over a year ago at this time in 2020 that we started to see that there were violent riots by Antifa and BLM and Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, otherwise known as PLOT. The far left Democratic Socialists were rioting in streets constantly throughout 2020, starting with the George Floyd riots. And those riots led to the creation of autonomous zones. And we saw these zones, in particular in Seattle, being the most prominent and well-known, was the autonomous zone, which was called the Chaz or the CHOP, which resulted in 4 shootings and a death of children in the autonomous zone. Something that was not unusual. In fact, we see from Forbes on June 29th of 2020, talking about the 4th shooting in the autonomous zone in Seattle as it was allowed to continue to exist. Now, let's be very clear. Autonomous zones, by definition and by law, violate every single law on a local, state, and federal level. They are, by definition, tyrannical and treasonous. There is no escaping that. And they were allowed to exist in Seattle, in Portland, in Austin, in New York City, and many cities throughout the nation. And in each of these autonomous zones, we saw that coupled with violence, riots, destruction of property, arson. In fact, we can see that it was CNN, in talking about the Kenosha violence, CNN was mocked because the news media in August of 2020 had gone out and said that even as we saw riots occurring, even as there was arson and buildings and properties were being burned down, we were being told by the news media that this was mostly peaceful, that this was just a protest and not a riot. So in part, the violence that we saw was due to the mislabeling and the PC correction of socialists and a very liberal news media saying, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe the reports of violence. Don't believe the arson and the riots and the murders that occurred, like in Atlanta, of an 8-year-old child. No, this was all peaceful. And the protests continued, and so did some arrests. And throughout this time, we were told the solution, the answer to the riots, was to defund the police, that we needed to remove the police and to put in its place social workers, that we need to have conversations with individuals, conversations that would be able to resolve some of the police shootings that led to protests and riots throughout the entire nation. One example of those solutions they were looking for was to resolve a situation that we covered here, the shooting of Ricardo Munoz. You may recall this. The shooting of Ricardo Munoz occurred in September of 2020. And this is one of the cases which was, it was identified as something where police were wrong and violent, and that a social worker was needed instead to resolve the situation. We'll show you the coverage that we provided in September of 2020. To the video. Before we go any further, we do want to mention that this scene is, some will consider it to be graphic, some will consider it to be violent. It is publicly available. It was available in September, but we want to give you the warning that some may find this to be violent. This is from the body cam unedited video.
20's coming your way.
Where'd he go? Get back, get back.
So, as we said, this was a shocking scene, a traumatic scene in September of 2020, and that self-defense, that act by a police officer to stop an individual with violent intent led to a riot in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And it was cited by some on the far left as an instance where social workers were needed to talk down that individual in the 4 seconds that would have prevented him from committing a violent murder, as he was attempting to do. Now, this was a big problem. The riots, the autonomous zones throughout the United States led in every single instance, in every single case where there was an autonomous zone, there was a consequential increase in the amount of violent crime. Everywhere there were protests in the United States seeking to defund the police and to isolate the police as the cause of all violence against people of color, we saw an increase, often exponential increase, in the amount of violent crime and murder in the United States. And you don't just have to believe us on that, because you can look at NPR. NPR, in their article on January 6th of 2021, detailed that there was a massive one-year rise in homicide rates that collided with the pandemic in 2020. As they state in their article, at the end of 2020, Chicago, a Democrat-run city for about 100 years, Chicago police reported more than 750 murders, a jump of more than 50% compared to 2019. By mid-December, Los Angeles, a Democratic city, saw an increase of 30% over the previous year with 322 homicides. There were 437 homicides in New York City, which is a Democrat-run city in a Democrat-run state. By December 20th, nearly 40% more than the year before. Mayor Bill de Blasio stated at the time, it's clearly related in part to the coronavirus and to the fact that people are cooped up. And it's certainly related to the fact that criminal justice system is on pause, and that's causing a lot of problems. Now, to put this into context, remember, in 2020, there was bail reform throughout the United States in many cities, in particular in New York State. And that bail reform released convicted felons. In fact, it was Governor Andrew Cuomo who mentioned first and was cited saying that there was a 10% increase in the number of individuals that were released because of bail reform. 10% of them went on to commit 2.4 crimes each within the 6 months of being released. So jail reform was put on pause. It was part of the answer. The criminal justice system was the problem. Police officers were the problem. And the protests and the riots and the arson and the murders were only a symptom of the police. In fact, we saw this as being the answer coming from no less than Congresswoman Cori Bush, who cited in Missouri, cited that defunding the police is not radical, it's real. That this was the solution. This was the answer the Democrats had come up with. And this is one of the reasons why they won their election in 2020, leading to Joe Biden and the Biden administration. And the answer to that is, as we see from the Wall Street Journal, is that it wasn't the answer. In fact, according to the Wall Street Journal, cities reverse defunding the police amid rising crime. On May 26 of 2021, it was revealed that the answer of removing police, in fact, as they cite, half of the 258 police agencies surveyed by the Police Executive Research Forum, a Washington, D.C. think tank, said their budgets had been cut or were likely to be cut. The cuts hit purchases of new police equipment hardest, followed by training, hiring, and overtime spending. We see that, according to the Barnard Center for Research on Women, an organization that supports defunding the police, the organizers successfully pushed for $840 million in police spending cuts across the United States and $160 million in shifts to other social programs, which would be social workers, the hiring of social workers to take care of police duties. And cities cut another $35 million by canceling contracts with police departments to patrol schools. So we are left with the answer from the left, from the very same Democratic Socialists that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden represent. The answer to the problem was, we first defund the police, we hire social workers, and we reform our prison system to allow no bail for many crimes, releasing criminals back into the public. And the answer that we saw was that crime was unabated. It did not stop. That, in fact, the amount of crime that we continue to see on the rise at this moment has, in some cases, gotten even worse, as we see many cities having even greater homicide and violent crime rates than we have seen ever before. And the answer from the left was to again ridicule and attack police officers. In fact, we were talking about this on April 25th of 2021 in discussing the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting. A woman, as you can see identified here in the picture, a young black woman, was attempting to murder another woman with a knife and was stopped by a police officer. We covered that in some detail, and we will cover that here. Okay? And as you can see on your screen, a police officer arrived on the scene. Within 10 seconds, he was confronted with this moment where an assailant, someone is attacking another woman who is undefended and was not provoking. She was standing still, and this other young woman came up and attempted to stab her, as you can see clearly, with a knife, which is attempted murder. That police officer reacted by shooting. Now, we can have the conversation. Do you think he should have shot her? Do you think he should have used a taser? There are some who have said, well, he should have tried to de-escalate the situation. Let me ask you, you have literally 2 seconds to save someone. I want to show it to you again. This is a mid-swing. This is taken from a video. So this is live action. Someone is in the moment, moving their arm. And let me ask you, what de-escalation that does not involve a gun or a taser, what's the de-escalation? What would it... So that was the question that was asked. What could you do? What would stop the violence that we saw? The answer from many Democrats that we saw at the time was, well, this was just a knife fight. These things happen. Kids, teenagers have knife fights, and they shouldn't be stopped. That the officer, according to LeBron James, was guilty for actually saving the life of one woman, even though that sadly involved the taking of a life of the offender, of the person, the aggressor, who is trying to kill someone in front of his eyes. Obviously, this has not been a satisfactory situation. And the White House is clearly aware of that. United States citizens are clearly aware. Defunding the police has not worked, which is why we see that police agencies across the nation are reversing their position, as we saw from the article and the details from the Wall Street Journal. The cities are reversing their position because defunding the police has not worked. Adding social workers has not worked. Riots have not caused less violence, and seeing that autonomous zones have not caused a reduction in violence, even as recently as the George Floyd trials in Minneapolis, where we saw the George Floyd Square Autonomous Zone led to the death of an individual just prior to the Derek Chauvin trial, and after the trial, a drive-by shooting being caught live on TV in George Floyd Square Autonomous Zone. Which leaves the White House with a question. How do they resolve this? What is the answer to this question that we have been talking about? And we see that according to NBC News on June 23rd, as they reported at 5 a.m., the problem, according to Joe Biden, is a surge in gun violence. The problem is that there was firearms are the problem. And so he has a strategy that will address 5 key areas stemming from the flow of firearms used to commit violence. They're going to go after providing law enforcement with more resources. Those resources are social workers. Investing in community violence interventions, which means propping up BLM and Plot, Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, and the far-left Democratic Socialists. Expanding summer programs and employment opportunities. Giving kids somewhere to go for the summer. After school programs, something that has existed up until the coronavirus lockdowns. And these summer programs are specifically for young people who are not necessarily the individuals who have created autonomous zones. They're not the individuals who have created riots. They're not the individuals that generally have been committing violence. And helping formerly incarcerated people re-enter their communities. That's the answer from the Joe Biden administration. And they will spend $350 billion in state and local funding included in the American Rescue Plan. This is Joe Biden's stimulus plan to hire more law enforcement officials, not law enforcement officers, but officials, in other words, social workers, and purchase equipment that would allow police departments to better respond to gun violence. But as we said, the problem isn't gun violence per se. It's the fact that we have less police officers. We have police officers who are being punished for doing their job and saving lives in many cases, and saving their own lives in many cases, and that we have allowed autonomous zones to continue to exist even to this moment, and that those autonomous zones are permitted to be in existence no matter what. So the White House is looking to do what is considered equity. They want to improve the equity in the United States. They want to provide for specific groups of people at the disadvantage of other groups of people. Now, you may take that definition as racism, and it is. But according to the far left, no, that's equity. If you listen to BLM, if you listen to Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, if you listen to the Democratic Socialists, Cori Bush, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, the answer is this is a good thing. And we've seen this being done in cities like New York City. And the result in New York City, as we can see, is that the New York Police Department has announced the citywide crime statistics in May of 2021. Again, New York City was one of the areas where an autonomous zone was attempted, and it resulted in riots. It resulted in looting. It resulted in destruction of property, burning of buildings, and several deaths. And we see that for the month of May 2021, the overall crime in New York City rose 22% compared with May of 2020, prior to the start of autonomous zones and rioting, driven by a 46.7% increase in robbery, a 35.6% increase in grand larceny. Felony assault had an increase of 20%, and the shootings in New York City increased to 173 versus May of 2020, prior to any autonomous zones, prior to any rioting. And that represents a 73% increase. This is troubling numbers. These are troubling numbers in almost every single category. In fact, even hate crimes were a problem. And the answer to all of this by the Biden administration is equity. To provide more money for specific groups of people, generally based on their color, than anything else. Not poverty, not low income, not education, but the color of someone's skin. Because Joe Biden believes in equity. The Democratic Party is ruled by equity. And when we say that, we mean not the first definition, which would be justice according to natural law or right. Because if you were to go by that definition of equity, no one has a right to riot. No one has a right to commit arson or to commit murder, like we saw in Indianapolis when Jessica Dottie Whitaker was killed. No one has a right to kill David Dorn. No one has a right to create an autonomous zone leading to the death of a child, an 8-year-old child in Atlanta, or the autonomous zone in Seattle, which resulted in the death of children there. There is no natural right. Equity does not provide you that right, though that is what is being supported by the far left. No, in fact, the actual definition of equity that is being used by the far left and the White House under the Biden administration is a body of legal doctrines and rules developed to enlarge, supplement, or override a narrow, rigid system of law. That narrow, rigid system of law is, well, our laws against rioting, our laws against arson, our laws against being able to defend yourself with the Second Amendment. Because that's what they're targeting. They want to increase laws like red flag laws to take away individuals' rights to protect themselves. Laws like the bill in New York State, Assembly Bill 352, which denies the average American citizen in New York State to be able to have a bulletproof vest to protect themselves from the surge in violence that we see ongoing right now that has started since May of 2020. That's the answer from the White House. We will throw money at this problem, and we will target that money towards minorities, in particular, Black Americans. Because that's always the solution, isn't it? That is the way to fix this. We're going to hire more social workers to deal with individuals like Ricardo Munoz or to deal with Micaiah Bryant. Individuals who have no desire to stop their violence and, in fact, only gave seconds before that violence resulted in death. And what has that truly resulted in when we look at this? What has been the result? The attempt to enforce equity. Well, according to the Daily Mail, as they reported on June 20th, just 3 days ago, there has been a fury in New York State and New York City as their prosecutors, the district attorneys in Manhattan and in the Bronx, dropped not just hundreds, in fact, thousands of charges against those who committed violent crimes in New York City. Let's be very clear. The article identifies 603 arrests in Manhattan and the Bronx, which resulted in less than 50% of those individuals, those charges, actually holding, that they have been removed. And far less than 50% of those individuals have actually been convicted of a crime. Less than these were actually brought to trial. In fact, they say of these cases, 222 were dropped, and 73 saw convictions for lesser counts such as trespassing. And that we saw that in the Bronx, 118 arrests were removed, and only 73 additional crimes were actually prosecuted. The answer was that the district attorney, Vance and Clark, representing Manhattan and the Bronx, decided that this was not in the best interest, that attempting to go and to prosecute these cases were not as important as preventing Donald Trump from being able to seek the 2024 election, and that they wanted to address allegations, not crimes, not proven crimes, but allegations of tax, loan, and insurance fraud. That's far more important. The emphasis needs to be not on this, as you can see this image here, not to show you, to address the arson that is going on, as we can see, which was in Soho in June 1st of 2020. That's not important. This actual looting and rioting, which we see also from June 1st in Manhattan, this looting and rioting, as we see here in this Getty image from New York City, this isn't the problem. The problem is politics. The problem is the potential of a Republican candidate in 2024 that must be stopped. And the answer is that, according to District Attorney Vance, the continued goal is to achieve consistency and equitable treatment in these cases. Equitable treatment means allowing the criminals to go without punishment, to not charge people just because of the color of their skin, even though they are caught having committed crimes. Many of those crimes being violent crimes, many of those crimes being property crimes. And the White House believes that that is the correct answer, that the answer is they should instead invest in community intervention and summer programs. Because that's really the answer, isn't it? Because that's the root problem. The problem that's facing America at this time is obviously that kids don't have something to do over the summer to occupy their time. And since they don't have something to do to occupy their time, their only answer is to riot and to have arson and to commit murder. The answer is obviously that we need to get rid of police and hire social workers, because having a conversation with a criminal who is, as we have seen in New York City recently and for the last year, walking up and just shooting people dead. Well, the answer to that is we just need a social worker. We need someone to talk to them about their anger issues and their problems. And we need to spend $350 billion of money that we do not have, that will create inflation and deflate the value of the dollar. That's where we need to spend money. Because the problem is racism. Because that's the root problem. It's not our laws are being left without execution, that there is no one who is actually following the law and allowing the law to punish criminals for committing criminal acts. No, no, no. The problem is that we need to have more mental health, and to quote again from NBC News, the issues are going to be to expand summer camps, to have mental health services, to have food assistance and job placement and other social services that will prevent crime. Because that's the real source of the problem. A summer camp, that's what the kids need, not to enforce laws and to tell people not to commit crimes and to punish them for the crimes that they've committed. That we need to make sure people have mental health services, which I do agree with, but that's to be in place of actually punishing people for committing the crimes that they have committed. And we have to release people based on the color of their skin, because that's equity. That's what the Biden administration is going to offer you, equity. They're going to offer you the answer to a rigid system that says, if you commit arson, if you commit murder, if you attempt to commit murder on our streets in broad daylight, then we have to release you if you are black, if you are a minority. We have to forgive your crimes if you are black, if you are a minority. Because the true problem is racism, because it's not equitable. This is the answer from the White House. And I have to ask a simple question. Do you think that's really the answer? Do you think that the real root cause is a lack of equity, not equality? Again, not equality, not treating all people the same under the law and the same opportunities. No, it is equity, putting certain people above other people for a political benefit. That's what the White House is going to offer you today. That's the direction that the United States is going to be taking in 2021 and going forward under the Biden administration until 2022, when we expect that the Kamala Harris administration will take over and they will continue on this theme. Equity. That's how you stop crime. That's how you right the wrongs that some believe are in America. That's how you change the flag like Macy Gray wishes to see happen. That's how you, improve the nation. That's what we're being told. And we have to punish people who want to keep the American flag the way it is. That we need to punish people who execute their rights under the Second Amendment. We want to punish people who want to see criminals tried and, if convicted, punished in the law. But that's not equitable. That doesn't put a preference on certain people based on the color of their skin, or their gender, or their sexual preference, or their religious ideology, or their political ideology. Perhaps you think I'm wrong. Perhaps when you watch Joe Biden and the White House make their announcement about equity today, you're going to say, no, this is perfectly fine. And $350 billion of money we don't have is always going to be the answer, because the government has always been right when they have thrown money at the problem. Think about the unemployment level. The Biden administration has done nothing but throw money at that problem. And that's been resolved. We've seen that be the answer to every problem. Immigration? Well, we have too many people. We have 16,000 children suffering child abuse, being sent 1,000 miles overland through a desert, being left on their own for the hope of being able to be in America. And the answer from the Biden administration was to go to Guatemala with Kamala Harris and spend money that we don't have. That's their answer. We're going to throw money at it because that is the only equitable answer. Not to hold people accountable, not to enforce the laws as they exist. No, the answer is we have to be equitable. We have to allow people of color to do whatever it is they want to do, regardless of what the laws actually may be in this nation. To allow autonomous zones to exist, even as they are tyrannical, even as they violate every law at the local, federal, and state levels, it doesn't matter. Because equity is far more important than equality or freedom. Now, perhaps you think we're wrong. Perhaps you think we've misunderstood. Perhaps you think our prediction is incorrect. We look forward to seeing your comments on this video in the comments section. And we hope that if you have found this to be interesting or informative, please like it, please share, and more importantly, please subscribe so that more people are able to engage in the free speech exercise that we are providing to you today and that we do every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Let's have a conversation about this. Is equity truly the answer to violent crime in the United States? What do you think? We look forward to seeing you again very soon.